Welcome to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Rose, and this podcast exists to help illuminate the path ahead of you. With expert interviews, clinical pearls, and real client success stories, my intention is to bring you hope for what's possible on this journey and to give you tools and resources to navigate the ups and downs on the road before you. If you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And I have a big request. If you have a minute, can you leave us a 5-star review? And let us know, what did you learn? What did you come away with? Did you leave with that spark of hope? This helps more people like you find the podcast. My mission is to support as many humans as possible on their path to become parent. And by you sharing and subscribing, you're part of that mission too. And I'm so grateful for you for being here. Welcome back to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode. If I can have like a fangirl moment, I have been reading Lily's work since my pregnancies, and her first book, Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, helped me so much with my blood sugar irregularities. And so I'm very grateful for that. And to have you here on the podcast today, Lily, is really just such a pleasure and a full circle moment for me as a mother and a fertility practitioner.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so glad my work has made an impact.
Yes. And so just to let our listeners know a little bit more about you, Lily Nichols is a registered dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, researcher, and author with a passion for evidence-based prenatal nutrition. Her work is known for being research-focused, which I so appreciate, thorough, and critical of outdated dietary guidelines. She's the founder of the Institute for Prenatal Nutrition, co-founder of the Women's Health Nutrition Academy, and author of 3 books: Real Food for Fertility, that was co-authored with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, Real Food for Pregnancy, and Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. Thank you so much for being here, Lily.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
So I'm always curious with our guest experts, what led you to this work?
It was a long journey. I decided fairly early on that I was really interested in the, intersection of human health and nutrition, how we could modify what we're eating to achieve optimal health. So I, was one of those few college students who didn't change my major, didn't change my mind, and stuck with it. It kind of veered into the women's health and prenatal space shortly after I became a dietitian. I fell into it a little bit by accident, actually. There was an opportunity to work with the California Diabetes and Pregnancy Program, and I took on that challenge, working at the public policy level with the state of California, which led into clinical work in the perinatology space and gestational diabetes management. And that's where I really got into the, why are our nutrition guidelines what they are. I mean, I'm one of those people who had been interested in nutrition long before I went to school. So I didn't go into my program with like rose-colored glasses with the idea that everything that I was learning was, absolutely true. I had a lot of questions and sort of critical thoughts about like, should our diet really be, more than half carbohydrates? Are our recommendations on meat really accurate? Like, is saturated fat really truly bad for your heart? Like, all of these types of questions were top of mind even when I was in my undergrad program. But it was when I was in the gestational diabetes space that I was like, wow, there is a huge disconnect here between what's actually going to achieve blood sugar balance and what these women are being told. And so that's where I really started, okay, let me like unpack in a little more detail, like, where did our guidelines come from? Why are we recommending such a high amount of carbohydrates? Is that truly evidence-based? And can we do better? So that kind of kicked off, a domino effect, I think, that has followed me for the rest of my career to date, which is looking really critically at the evidence used to set our guidelines and then looking at more current research on how we can do better. How can we not only optimize maternal blood sugar levels, but how can we improve pregnancy outcomes? How can we improve fertility? How can we improve postpartum recovery? How can we prevent pregnancy complications before they start? And some of that goes all the way back to preconception, not only with the mom, but with dad's sperm quality as well. So it's been kind of a long journey. But what's funny is I think a lot of people know my work for being very like detailed, looking into these studies and all this data and all these statistics. But at the end of the day, I have a very relaxed approach to food. And I think that probably comes across more in my social media or on my blog than it does in my books, but it's like, let's really zoom out here. Like, given all of these details, like, what do we do with it? I really try to focus on the practical application, because it's also really easy for people to get completely lost in the weeds of all these little nitty-gritty details and feel overwhelmed. And I am really trying to like provide the data, but the context, so it's not so scary.
And I so appreciate that, because the types of questions that I get, and my patient population and a lot of our listeners are very detail-oriented people, often in the recovering perfectionist spectrum. And so they take information often very seriously, very literally, and it can get overwhelming, especially when you start to take in the lifestyle factors of, where we're getting exposed to certain environmental toxicants and the details of like, how much exercise should I be getting? Like, they do get very overwhelmed by all of the information. So actually knowing how to simplify it and implement it in a realistic way is, one of my primary goals to support people with. But I want to back up, because you said a couple of things that I feel like are just so important to acknowledge, that how we potentially protect fertility, impact pregnancy, prevent pregnancy complications, postpartum concerns, starts way preconception. And how long would you say before conception is it important to really start thinking about nutrition?
And that is a tricky question to answer, and one that my co-author for the fertility book, Lisa, and I had many conversations about, because there isn't really like a cut and dry answer where we have like, oh, we have this perfect study that exactly identifies this, preconception window where we want to really be paying close attention to diet and lifestyle choices. So I would say there's a spectrum. We can start at the sort of basic information on how long it takes for sperm to develop and for egg cells to develop. And with sperm, it's pretty cut and dry. It's like 70 something days. So you're talking 2 to 3 months. For a human egg cell, it gets a little more complicated, because we're born with our eggs, and then we recruit certain eggs to develop fully before ovulation. And so if you go all the way back to when an underdeveloped follicle is recruited, okay, you're chosen, and we're going to work on developing you until finally you're ovulated and have the opportunity to become fertilized. That's a 220-day rewind the clock sort of situation. So like 7 to 8 months, right? I will say the last couple months before ovulation is when that egg cell is particularly sensitive to the nutrition and lifestyle inputs. So again, it kind of puts us in that minimum 3-month range. That amount of time might be extended if there's other underlying health issues that we need to address. So we want to be realistic with the timeline. For somebody who's been struggling with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and there's some, imbalance in the hormones, high androgen levels, maybe insulin, and our body's sensitivity to insulin isn't quite where it needs to be. This could lead to delays in conception, and it is optimal if we can give a little more time to work on insulin resistance, to work on improving our metabolic health in advance of conception. Likewise, if somebody has, has been on hormonal contraceptives for a long time, the way in which those medications work is they shut down ovarian function. They shut down ovarian hormone production. And there is a lag time for once you have come off of those synthetic hormones for your ovaries to kick back into gear. And yes, there's always examples of some individuals who come off the pill and they, get pregnant right away. But when we look at the data, looking at larger data sets of women, there is often a delay, sometimes many months. For some, it's over a year until their ovaries are functioning properly, right? And
Absolutely.
So if we're just saying like, oh, come off the pill and then you try right away, that's all fine and good. But now you've created a lot of anxiety among that individual because they're like, oh crap, it's now been 6 months. It's now been a year. I've been trying every cycle and I'm not conceiving yet. Like, we need to give realistic timelines because it just takes a while for hormones to come back into balance. Oftentimes we need to focus on some nutritional repletion because the pill and other hormonal contraceptives can change the way in which our body utilizes nutrients or even deplete levels of certain nutrients. So we talk about that in the book and areas that you might want to focus on. So that's why me giving you like a specific time frame is difficult because I think it will depend on the individual. And on the flip side, let me just add that you may have somebody has a lot of lifestyle choices pretty dialed in already. They might not need an extra 3 to 6 months to be working on lifestyle choices because they already are in pretty good health. Their menstrual cycle is really regular. Like the prep time might not apply in that situation. So it depends.
Yes. And I would absolutely agree with that. I think sometimes it's nice, when people hear it from another expert and not just me. Like I almost become like, okay, mom, like, yeah, I've heard it from you, but hearing it from multiple sources, well-researched sources is important. And I would totally agree with that. I mean, in 12 years of practice, I've started collecting the data of my patient population, and the time to conception is on average 7 to 8 months after working with me. So that is really interesting. And of course, we have outliers. We have people who it's 2 months. We have people who it's 2 years. And my journey of coming off oral contraceptives was that it took about 2.5, 3 years to get a regular, semi-regular cycle back. It wasn't even completely regular when I conceived my first son. It didn't become completely regular until postpartum, post-breastfeeding. And so truly 4.5, almost 5 years from the time of stopping birth control.
Yeah.
So it's a huge, wide range, and I don't know that we can say what's normal, but it absolutely can be looked at and supported based on that individual's history.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And using your cycle parameters, if you pay attention to what's happening with your menstrual cycle, your signs of ovulation of that fertile window, that gives you a good window into what might be going on in the body, even before doing, advanced lab work, or can even guide some of the lab work that might be necessary to see like, well, why are we having this observation in the first place?
Absolutely. And even, my frustration, which has persisted over the years, is that even in naturopathic school, we did not receive great guidance on how to support someone in recovering from being on birth control for a decade, how to really dial in nutrition for someone who's trying to conceive, or someone in pregnancy who we want to have the healthiest pregnancy possible. Even though we had a lot of nutrition education, we were not given specific guidelines. So when your book came out, it was like, oh my gosh, this felt like finally we've got something. And obviously for people who are listening now, they have this resource too. But how do we get this into the education guidelines?
That is the $1 million question. Yeah, it's wild when you look at even among dietitians, which we have, at minimum 5 years of education, and it's very focused on nutrition. When I've surveyed other dietitians, most of us only got a single lecture or maybe 2 lectures in our entire 5 years on prenatal nutrition. It's just like a mention within another course looking at nutrition across the life cycle, and that's about it. And when you look at medical doctors who are specializing in obstetrics, there's been research published on this. Most of them only get a single lecture, maybe like a 1 to 3 hour lecture on prenatal nutrition. And then what is communicated in that 1 or 2 lectures that any of us get? Well, it's just rehashing the guidelines. And then where do the guidelines for prenatal nutrition come from? They essentially are an offshoot of our dietary guidelines. And the vast majority of them are simply derived from what they call factorial methods, where it's a mathematical estimate. Okay, because, women are smaller than men, typically, we're basing this recommendation off of their smaller body weight. Okay, now they're pregnant. We know the fetus accrues this amount of the nutrient. Okay, we'll set this a little bit higher. But they haven't been tested. Vast majority of nutrients. I have some really interesting research. I think it's in a research brief somewhere buried in my Instagram feed on the micronutrient recommendations, the dietary reference intakes for pregnancy. And they looked at what % of studies were based on women or women who are pregnant or breastfeeding. And it's like shocking how many of those nutrients, when you go vitamin and mineral all in a row in a chart, have absolutely 0 studies specifically in women. And then even worse when you're looking at pregnancy and breastfeeding. There's only a handful where we actually have data based on that life stage in a woman's life. So it's wild. Then when you start looking at like, okay, well, how have the guidelines changed over the years? And many of them have not been updated or haven't been updated significantly in decades. So I'll give you an example. Protein recommendations for pregnancy. What's in our official guidelines is actually not based on data in pregnant women.
That's fun.
That's fun, right? Yeah. So 2015 marked the first ever study that directly estimated protein requirements in pregnancy. And they also looked at different stages of pregnancy, early pregnancy and late pregnancy. First time that type of research had ever been done, because some of the methods they're doing where you're looking at oxidation of individual amino acids, like those were relatively new methods they didn't have at the time when they set the guidelines for pregnancy. They found, unsurprisingly, that our protein recommendations are a significant underestimate, especially in late pregnancy. They're 73% lower than they should be. But nonetheless, okay, it's now been 10 years since that research was done, and we still have yet to see changes in the guidelines to reflect that research. I mean, that's like groundbreaking, really important research. It's kind of shocking that they haven't looked at that and updated it. So that gives you one example. There's many more where it's like there's just a lag time, not only a lag time in things getting into clinical practice, which seems to be about a 17-year lag time per the analyses that have been done on that. But then it's an even longer lag time when you look at when the guidelines get updated, when policies get updated. And having worked just in a tiny little area of nutrition policy in the state of California with gestational diabetes, I can attest to the sort of bureaucracy, like the opinion, the group committee opinion on things, like how many delays there are and how many barriers there are in making those changes. And I mean, it's pretty frustrating, when you have great data coming out and you're not seeing that put into practice. So that's part of the reason that I write and educate, is to fill that gap. That's why I started the Institute for Prenatal Nutrition, because I have all these practitioners who want to be doing better. And yes, I have a ton of information in my books, but it's not like, doesn't have the level of like nuance and specificity. Like we go into way more detail in that program so you can actually assess the person in front of you and give targeted recommendations. That I just don't know anyone that's teaching that. And it's a shame.
It is a shame. And I'll never forget about 5 years ago, it must have been around the time that Real Food for Pregnancy came out. I had a patient who was an OBGYN, and she'd been struggling with fertility, and she conceived, and I gave her a copy of the book, and she was just like, oh, okay. And like she was maybe a little taken aback. And she came back a few weeks later and she was like, well, I read the book and it was really eye-opening. And, as someone in her position who seeing pregnant patients, and as an MFM, she was seeing complicated patients as well. And also leading residents through training, I was like, this, at least in our little community, this little pocket, we're going to get some good going here.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk about the protein recommendations because this seems to be a little theme as of late. I'm seeing a lot of new patients coming in who are on primarily plant-based diets. And as I talk to them about the protein recommendations and how challenging it can be to meet the protein requirements with a plant-based diet, I want to be careful about people's ethical preferences and also their nutrition, like what they like to eat as well, and knowing that not everyone enjoys eating meat or seafood. Where do we begin to support someone who likely is depleted in many nutrients being on a plant-based diet for years on end?
It's a difficult one. And this is a topic I've kind of tried to avoid directly addressing in the past. So if you look at the trajectory of my books over time, I didn't even talk about vegetarian diets in Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, because why would I spend time talking about something that I found to be the most difficult dietary pattern to achieve glycemic control? Certainly I worked with a lot of vegetarian clients, but it was so challenging, and it was very often we had to have more medical management of medication and insulin. So it's like, nah, I'm just not going to go into that. Not the time, not the place. Don't add that controversial topic. And then in Real Food for Pregnancy, it's like an addendum to the end of the chapter on foods that I recommend, because so many of those foods happen to be animal foods, going into some of the micronutrients and things that might be of concern. And then in Real Food for Fertility, the most recent book, there's a whole chapter on vegetarian diets, and it goes far beyond just the micronutrient concerns. We're really diving into the macronutrient balance and intake, some of the specific amino acids, the so-called non-essential amino acids, and how those play a role in fertility. And then going into the other area, which is after so many people read Real Food for Pregnancy, they're like, well, I think I need to add animal foods, but I don't even know where to start. Yeah. So it kind of holds your hand and walks you through some options. So first and foremost, as a former vegetarian and family member and friend to many currently practicing vegetarians and vegans, I completely understand all the reasons that people might choose to eat in a particular way. And I don't think there's really any arguing with people who feel that strongly about continuing that pattern for ethical or religious or those two reasons. I think environmental, we can have a conversation, but there's some people where it's a strongly held personal belief, and then it becomes a matter of, I think, educating on the areas where there could be gaps in the diet, and then getting really targeted with supplementation, while still acknowledging there may be certain holes in the diet that would be difficult to fill, even with as robust of a supplementation plan that you can come up with. And then the other conversation for individuals who maybe they chose the diet just for health reasons, or they watched a documentary on Netflix or something, but it's not as much of a strongly held, unchanging belief. They might be more open to incorporating some animal foods to fill those gaps. And I will say I've seen I still to this day, get at least, I don't know, 3 to 5 people emailing or messaging me every week, sharing the change they've observed in their health, fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding journey, whatever across the childbearing years spectrum, improvement in their health when they've added in animal foods. And not all of these people, it's not like you have to become like full-on carnivore or something. Sometimes it's like you have a person, maybe they just added in eggs with the yolks and oysters, like 2 small things. There's even a group of people who call themselves, I believe it's called ostro-veganism, where you include certain types of bivalve shellfish. They don't have a central nervous system. They can't feel pain. So for people who don't want to eat animal foods because they don't want to harm animals, some people feel comfortable eating those foods. And they happen to be incredibly nutrient dense, right? Oysters, mussels, clams. And so we fill a ton of nutritional gaps by just including those foods, 2-3 times a week. And sometimes that's enough to really like dramatically overhaul somebody's health and their conception journey. So I think my role is to work on the education aspect without drawing in all the like dogma and emotional opinions that come in. I really just stick to the facts. Okay. Like here is the data on vitamin B12, how it's important for pregnancy or fertility, depending on which book you're reading, and your child's health. And this is how you get it. Okay. Not willing to eat those foods, then that needs to be something that you're supplementing, not only preconception, but during pregnancy and also postpartum while you're nursing as well, because that affects the B12 levels in your breast milk, which affects baby's B12 status, which is, a huge, huge, huge issue. So that's kind of how I tackle it. I think focusing in on the micronutrients is one of the more helpful ways to do it. I think your original question was on like the protein considerations. I would say, I think Real Food for Fertility does the best job in diving into the considerations on protein quality and amino acid balance. So I encourage people to read through that to kind of get an idea of how the quality of protein and the amino acid balance and protein-rich foods and the digestibility of different sources of protein can play a role in whether it's going to have the same effect on your system. This is actually new to me as of the time that I was researching and writing that book, but our RDA for protein, the amount of protein you're supposed to have every day, which population-wide is set way too low. Let's call that out first and foremost. But for vegetarians, they didn't set a separate RDA because they were under the assumption that half of their protein needs would be met from animal foods, namely dairy and eggs.
Interesting.
And so there was no separate RDA set because we're assuming that half of their protein intake is coming from complete proteins. Now, and if you look back at like vegetarians in the 90s, 80s, 70s before, and we had a lot of vegetarian friends and family members, it's like they were having quiches and casseroles that had eggs and cheese. Like those foods were still pretty prominent in their diet unless they were fully vegan. Now the way in which a lot of people are approaching plant-based or vegetarian diets is really going like full vegan. A lot of people are avoiding dairy and are avoiding eggs. And so there's a pretty high proportion of vegetarians and plant-based eaters who really are not getting half of their protein needs met from complete protein sources. And so that data suggested that actually we should be aiming even higher for protein requirements for those individuals because a lot of the protein they're getting is not usable by their body. It's not as bioavailable. It's not as digestible. The amino acid balance is not up to par with animal foods. So your body has to expend a whole lot of energy and nutritional resources trying to get the amino acids or create some of the so-called non-essential amino acids to fill the biological needs of your body. And so when you think about fertility as something where we need everything pretty much optimal or close to it for our reproductive function, for our hormone levels and everything to be in a good spot for conception. Like your body needs to be completely safe, that it has like all available resources will be here to grow this child. Otherwise, it's just going to pull hormone levels down and ovulation off the table. So like there's no chance that we're even going to try for a pregnancy right now because we're in a famine situation. Like that is the biological signal that your body gets. And so to me, it's like when we have all these other stressors in our lifestyle, we're more stressed out than ever. Our circadian rhythms are messed up. Our, toxin exposure is a mess. Many of us have been on hormonal birth control for who knows how long. Like all these factors are already stacked against us. And then we add just one more stressor in. Okay, protein intake is kind of low. The quality isn't quite there. Now our body has to do all this extra work to try to get the amino acids together to make the bodily proteins that we need for all these different functions. It's just like one more straw that broke the camel's back. And for some individuals, that is the missing piece in their fertility journey. And I'm sure you've seen that clinically in your work, where it's like, yes, until they add enough animal protein, nothing is working. Yes. And I've seen that countless times. Lisa's seen that countless times. And so it kind of takes a gentle conversation about like, what are our goals here and what is most important to you? Is it to stick to a certain ideology or ethical belief or whatever? Or is it that you really want to have a baby? And for some individuals, it's like, okay, I really want to have a baby. I'm going to make this compromise for right now. And then maybe after my childbearing years, I might choose to revert back. That's fine. That's all on you, because the only person's health that's affected by that decision is yours, right? So I don't have an easy answer.
No, but I appreciate you having the conversation around it, because that has been a real challenging thing to approach in my practice. And I think I've evolved to do a decent job of it. And just like you described, like your body needs to feel safe. And when we are not getting enough protein, enough micronutrients, and often those foods go hand in hand, right? The animal proteins that are highest in bioavailable protein are also quite nutrient dense, with your zinc and your B vitamins and your choline and all the things that your body needs to feel safe. And so I kind of describe to people that, when we are missing those and the body has to prioritize the vital organs over everything else, it's not giving attention to the reproductive system. That's second fiddle. It's like, why would we be prioritizing reproduction when like we just need to stay alive?
Exactly.
And once we have that abundance and the body feels safe, it happens very easily for a lot of people. Not everyone. Obviously, we have some complex situations, but like you, I've seen it over and over and over again, that just a little bit, adding, bone broth and some really long cooked, slow roasted beef, kind of hiding it in some bean vegetable soups. Like, it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't mean that you have to eat a 12-ounce steak every day. Yep. I've seen differences with just like a couple ounces a few times a week. And I learned something from you about, what did you call it again with the bivalves and egg?
Ostroveganism.
That's a new word for me.
They're vegans, but they'll eat bivalve shellfish, so oysters, clams, and mussels. Yeah.
I love that I learned something new from that today.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think this is also a good segue into talking about supplementation, because I see a spectrum of, the new people who come into my world. Some of them are under the assumption that they can kind of eat whatever they want as long as they're supplementing with good quality supplements. And they'll come in with their rolly suitcase of 25 things. And on the flip side, I get people who are like, I don't trust supplements. I don't think I should take anything, as I want to get everything I can from food. So what's the reality of how supplements play a role in the preconception phase?
Yeah, so I take the approach with supplements of food first. Like, let's try to optimize everything we can through the diet whenever possible. Because at the end of the day, this is what our physiology knows. Before the era of isolating nutrients and putting them in supplement form, which really has only come in the last century, we didn't have that option. We had to get it through food. And so oftentimes things are in synergistic quantities in foods where they work together, like the DHA and the choline in eggs or salmon. They work together to help those nutrients get to the brain and get into the fetal brain to optimize brain development. Like that's fantastic. That said, like our diet quality has gone down over time. I know there's some individuals who are really doing all the things, eating all the nutrient dense foods, but the concentration of nutrients in lots of foods has declined over the years with our aggressive farming practices, the way things are stored for long periods of time as they're transported. You know, you can look at the folate levels in spinach from when it's first picked to when it's sat on the shelf for a week or 2 weeks, and then it's cooked, and you see levels in a lot of nutrients decline over time. So I just think as a whole, the nutrient density of our diet is not where it was originally. And I also think if you have the luxury of working with a practitioner like yourself and you test micronutrient status, which I'm sure you do with some of your clients, you see that even the people who are eating super squeaky clean are not always hitting the marks for all the things. I know for myself, and I've been eating a whole food, real food type diet that I describe in my books for over 2 decades now. Not that I'm like 100% perfect, right? But I really have prioritized nutrient density probably more than the average American for a lot longer than the average person who's just starting to eat healthy. And I tested my micronutrient status before my second pregnancy. Granted, this is also after nursing for more than 2 years, so that depletes you. But I'd been supplementing, eating really well, and I was shocked that I was still low in a lot of things. So I view supplements as, precisely as the name suggests, to supplement an already nutrient-dense diet and also to fill in specific gaps if you happen to have lab testing showing that somebody is low in something, to fill in those gaps that you might not be getting through food. At the end of the day, when we look at deficiency rates in nutrients across women of childbearing age, I mean, it's like half of women have at least one or more micronutrient deficiencies. And it's probably even higher if those analyses had tested like the full spectrum of nutrients. A lot of these analyses will pick 8 or 10 nutrients, and they're like, half of women are low in them. Exactly. A lot of times they're not adding in everything else. So, you know, over 90% of women are not hitting the marks for choline. Our choline requirements are set twofold lower than they should be because they didn't account for data on women when they first set those, and those have not been updated since 1998 when they were first set, right? So there's like, you start adding in all these little pieces of the puzzle, and it's like, okay, there is a place for supplementation. And if there is ever a place for supplementation, I would argue that it's in the childbearing years, preconception, pregnancy, and postpartum, particularly while you're nursing or preparing for a subsequent pregnancy. Do whatever you want with the rest of the stages, but the consequences of low vitamin and mineral status on your baby's development, or even on your chances of conception, I think it's compelling enough that I'm in support of most people having some sort of supplemental help. We're just not hitting the mark with our diet most of the time.
Yeah, I do see that in practice with the micronutrient testing. And, you know, often we are only available to access what we can test through someone's insurance. And that creates, you know, some deficiency in what we can actually test for. But gathering that good history is really impactful too, because if someone is keeping a food journal for me for a few weeks and I can look at that and say like, okay, well, like they're not getting much in the way of eggs or red meat at all. So we can also assume that they're going to benefit from choline supplementation. Even if we can't necessarily test micronutrients for every single person because their insurance won't cover that. Having someone who's willing to ask the questions, willing to look at what you're eating is really impactful. And I just see over and over again, like how much better people also feel when they're well nourished. And yes, most people are coming to me with the primary goal of getting pregnant and staying pregnant. But because that's such a high focus, there's often been a neglect of like how they feel as a person as well. And even maybe just the chronic stress of trying for years has depleted them in many ways. And that
Yes.
stress in and of itself means we're using up more of our nutrients. So I talk to people about nutrition as nourishment, right? Not what we're removing, what we're restricting, but like how can you get enough of what you need to be deeply nourished?
Yeah.
Instead of
I'm,
obsessing about avoiding gluten, avoiding seed oils, avoiding everything that you've ever loved about anything in food, like let's look at what you actually need more of and how to get that in. And it will kind of naturally crowd out the things that maybe were just adding calories but not nutrient density.
yes. And that is even more true when you have somebody focus on optimizing their protein intake, because protein is so satiating, but also so nutrient dense that a lot of those nutritional vices that sneak in are kind of solved by just making sure they're getting enough protein, especially at breakfast, right? So it's like
Yes.
the mid-morning snack attack where you want to have the donut that's sitting in the office and the super sweetened coffee. Well, if we set you up for success with a large enough protein sufficient breakfast, your blood sugar hasn't crashed mid-morning. You're not hungry and tempted for the donut. Also, if you've eaten enough for the earlier part of the day, you're not going into the evening hours super snacky while you watch, evening TV shows or whatever, because you've been nourished. People really, I don't think, focus enough on like interrupting the pattern by nourishing yourself well. Instead, it's kind of the punitive like willpower and control, and that doesn't usually work out long term. And I've used myself as a guinea pig enough times where it's like, ooh, maybe I will just have this, smaller, snacky, light breakfast that's like all carbs. And then the rest of the day is like shot, right? I'm just like
Oh my
starving
gosh.
the whole day,
So sensitive
like
to it.
digging through the pantry, trying to find whatever snacks are in there. It's just like, okay, I've learned my lesson. Even if I'm not in the mood for it, I need to get a protein rich breakfast, and then all the other ducks fall in a row for the rest of the day. And until people try that for themselves, it doesn't sound like it can be that easy. But it's like I've worked on that with every single client I've ever worked with, because that interrupts the pattern of habits that lead to all of these other issues down the line.
Absolutely. I'm so sensitive to that. And I have a theme of a post of my weird breakfast Wednesdays, because it's like steak and vegetables, or today it was like turkey breast and mashed sweet potatoes. Like it doesn't have to be this typical North American breakfast food of like waffles and cereal. Like that might be something that you grew up on, and it's not serving this scenario at this point in life. And people are often shocked at how much more energy they have, how much more clarity they have if they were prone to migraines or mood swings, or that energy crash in the afternoon where they were like, oh, I just have to have chocolate and coffee at 3 p.m., but then they're not sleeping. And
Exactly.
it can be as simple as get a protein rich breakfast and just
Yeah.
start there. We'll see how everything else falls into place, but we don't have to hyper focus on every other little detail if we can just start this simple place.
And you don't have to focus as much as a clinician on don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And it's more on like, do this and let's see how everything else shakes out. It's much more positive to be focusing on the things to include more of. And that's been a shift in the way I've approached nutrition counseling over the years as well. It's like I used to focus so much on let's educate on the refined carbohydrates and the processed foods and why you need to avoid those things. And there's a time and a place for that discussion, but I like how it's moved in a more positive direction. I think it sits better with clients, and it also is just as effective, if not more effective, because if you cut out something and you're now eating fewer calories, you're going to be hungry and you need to fill the void with something. And so what are you going to fill the void with? We have to talk about that.
The first time so my journey into naturopathic medicine started as a patient when I was in college and struggling with an autoimmune disorder. And I was put on this elimination diet based on food sensitivity testing that basically took out everything that I was eating on a regular basis. And I just remember standing in front of the fridge, like paralyzed, like, okay, but what do I eat? And it took me a few months. Like I lost weight because I literally just didn't know what to eat, and I didn't need to lose weight, but it took me months to figure out, well, what does that look like? And that's when my weird breakfast started. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just make extra chicken and have chicken for breakfast because I can't have eggs right now. Like, it was a very weird time, and it taught me a lot about restriction and how that creates like I struggled mentally during that time, I guess I will say. Like, it really made me like a little crazy for a while. And I'm very cautious with my patients about restriction, but I do still get questions. And I think just because I work with people who are perfectionistic and, they want to make sure they're doing everything right, that the most common question I'm getting most recently is about seed oils and like, how important is it to avoid all seed oils? And I know that you write about vegetable oils in the book, but I am curious to know what your answer to that would be before we wrap up.
Well, it's almost impossible to avoid all seed oils, right? Unless you're cooking 100% of everything from scratch and you never eat out at restaurants. Or if you eat out at restaurants, you happen to be lucky enough to live in an area that has restaurants that aren't cooking with seed oils. That's not my reality where I'm currently living. So I'm not completely seed oil free, even though I acknowledge I don't think they're a health food at all. And I do try to avoid them. I try to avoid them in any of the packaged items I'm buying at the grocery store. And of course, I don't keep seed oils in my house, aside from a toasted sesame seed oil that I might use in like an Asian recipe or something. I don't keep seed oils in the house for cooking. There's no canola or soy oil or whatever. So that part is within my control. Quality of life for me would not be great if I never had the opportunity to eat at restaurants. So I kind of don't worry about it at restaurants. It's just a given. There's going to be some seed oils. Although I do try to choose things that aren't fried because that's going to give you the biggest bomb of seed oils when you're eating out at a restaurant. I think people have gone a little like, it's like every, 3 to 5 years, there's a new dietary boogeyman that everybody hyper focuses on and obsesses about more than they need to. Like gluten was that issue not that long ago, and people have eased up on it. And then it was dairy. And then, as the plant-based movement, it was all the animal foods. Those are bad. And then 80s and 90s, it was dietary cholesterol. Everything was cholesterol or fat-free. So there's always going to be like a new thing that everybody's freaked out about. I think you need to do your best to, minimize their consumption because they're just not great quality fats, and they are very prone to oxidation, which can set up an inflammatory response in your own system. I don't think they are benefiting anybody's health, but I think you have to just kind of take a middle of the road nutritional common sense approach to it and control what's in your control without ruining your quality of life. So my middle ground is trying to avoid it in packaged foods as best as I can. And I'm also not perfect. Sometimes I want to have potato chips. It's like, I got potato chips.
Corn chips
it is what it is.
I'm just like, it brings me joy.
And it's like, yes, there are some brands that you can special order to get the ones that are fried in tallow for like a huge markup, by the way.
$8 a bag.
$12 a bag, and I've gotten some of those because I think it's cool. But it's not accessible to everybody. So we have to be realistic about it too. I don't think like having a serving of potato chips once a week or twice a week and eating out at a restaurant once a week is going to like push you over the edge on, inflammation from seed oils. I think where it is going to make a bigger impact is when you have someone whose habits are like, there's always canola oil in the house, right? And they're stir frying their foods at high temperatures in that canola oil, or deep frying it in canola oil. They're mixing up baked goods several times a week, and they're using seed oils in there. Like if I'm making a cake, I'm going to melt butter or coconut oil and use that in its place, right? So, and it's the people using high amounts of mayonnaise or any of the store-bought salad dressings. So it's like shifting the practices where it's like, okay, when I bake, I'm going to use more traditional, healthier fats. When I'm choosing salad dressing, I'm either going to read the ingredients like a hawk, or I'm going to mix up my own vinaigrette with olive oil or avocado oil. It's like those little shifts, I think, make a bigger impact than the hyper obsession and like ruining your quality of life from taking restaurant eating off the table.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very glad to hear that, because I think I said a very similar approach to a patient just a couple of days ago who was really worried about the seed oil. I'm like, am I allowed to eat out? And it's like, oh, okay, we're going to like the permission to be able to eat at a restaurant once a week, and have a quality of life is important for your nervous system as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I very much appreciate common sense, research-based approach. I hope everyone who is listening goes out and buys Real Food for Fertility, and then, extend that into your pregnancy and your postpartum phases, because it made such an impact between like the difference of my first pregnancy and second pregnancy. When I had that information, my energy was so much better. My nausea was lower. I slept better. My postpartum recovery was so much easier. So I can speak from the personal experience, and I've seen this in hundreds of patients as well, since really utilizing those practices within my own medical practice and in the Brilliant Fertility program. So I appreciate you so much, Lily. Thank you for being here. Where can people find you so that they can read more? And I love your research briefs on your website, but where can people nerd out with you?
Yeah, so my website, lilynicholsrdn.com, has tons of resources. There's no paywall on my site, and there are hundreds of blog articles. So you want to read about protein in pregnancy, type in protein and you'll find an article on it. You want to read about folate versus folic acid, type in folate, you'll find an article on it, and so on and so forth. Like there's so many examples of different topics that I've addressed there, and some of them in like a lot of detail. Let's see, you can get the first chapter of Real Food for Pregnancy on my site under the freebies tab. You can get the first chapter of Real Food for Fertility for free over at realfoodforfertility.com. So if either of those books appeal to you, check them out. And to clarify, because I get asked this question, if you are not currently pregnant, get the fertility book. If you are currently pregnant, get the pregnancy book. Even if you're towards the end of your pregnancy, get the pregnancy book, because there's a very detailed chapter on postpartum and breastfeeding that will really help you be prepared for postpartum, but also nourish yourself well. Of course, I have Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, but that is an addendum. That's an extra resource if you happen to get diagnosed. I cover the preventative strategies for gestational diabetes in the Real Food for Pregnancy book, though. So you only need the gestational diabetes one if that applies in that particular situation in your pregnancy. Let's see. I don't know. There's so many more things I could mention. Practitioners who want additional mentorship, I have the Institute for Prenatal Nutrition. For all the podcast interviews I've done, there's hundreds of those linked on my press page if you want to listen to more. And then the research briefs you alluded to, those I post on my Instagram. You'll see them. They're usually in like a blue or a white background. So updates on information, studies I found interesting, and then trying to put the findings into context. Those are all on my Instagram, intermixed with all sorts of odd meal ideas, probably similar to what you're describing. Plenty of breakfast inspiration there, because that's a meal I'm always encouraging people to try to get into their day. And yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And for anyone listening, if you got something from this episode, let us know. Reach out to me on Instagram. I don't know, Lily, if you take much comments or if you're able to address messages on Instagram, but I love when our listeners reach out and just let me know like what they really took from this episode. And if you'd like to take 30 seconds to rate and review the podcast, just get this into more ears because this information is so valuable. We want healthy babies, healthy pregnancies, healthy mamas, and a healthier world as a result of that. Thank you so much for the work you do, Lily, and for being here today.
And likewise for you. Thank you.